one guy from Texas was sounded like 20 people. Welcome to Startup Grind. 4 years ago, we started hosting events like this, very small, about 2 miles from here in my office. And the whole idea was just to get people together that could help each other and could, that were willing to share what they knew with each other. And that's kind of continued now 4 years later. Last year, we had about, as you see with the thing that's sitting on your seat, we had about 21,000 people attend a Startup Grind at 300 events in about 60 cities around the world. If you see someone wearing, thank you. My dad is clapping. My dad started the clap. I appreciate that. Thank you. I love you. So if you see someone wearing a Startup Grind jacket, these people are our chapter directors. They are from somewhere around the world. And they run a Startup Grind just like this. Every month they're running a Startup Grind and getting their local community together and helping them. If you're from somewhere where we don't have a Startup Grind chapter, maybe we should. Either come find me or find someone in a jacket. They'll tell you what it's really like, how crazy I am to work with. And then go to our website, and there's a link right at the top, and that will come directly to me. If you are a chapter director and you're in the room, will you stand up real quick so people can see you? Great. Mexico, Tel Aviv, Sweden, New Delhi, Utah, London, and Vancouver, and Dubai. So thank you all very much for being here. The hashtag today is Startup Grind. We will have screens around the event that will be displaying your tweets. We will be retweeting you with our Twitter account. So hashtag Startup Grind all day, every session. Put the speakers tags in there. You're going to see them as they come up on screen. Then they'll favorite it, and that'll make you feel really good. We have this tradition at Startup Grind, and that is that, before I talk about our tradition, let me just mention a couple of people that make this happen. There are so many partners that make this happen. We don't have a huge startup alley area. That's kind of by design. It's not because no one wants to come and show their products. It's because we just pick a couple of great partners that we like to work with, and then we really like to feature them very heavily, and we like our entrepreneurs to use their products because we know they're great. And a couple people I want to just mention, Google for Entrepreneurs, who powers our whole program. We're one of only 2 programs in the world that they power on a global basis, and this really is impossible without them. The Kauffman Foundation, which is a $2 billion foundation out of Kansas City, run by started by an entrepreneur who was just passionate about helping entrepreneurs be successful. And we'll be sending out a couple days, or the day after the event, a survey that will have a few things about you can help us do better for next year, but it will also have a number of things in there that the Kauffman Foundation is helping us with to track how we can be better entrepreneurs, and so that we can help ourselves to know how we can be better and also help the next generation. So if you could take the time to do that, we'd appreciate it. And then we also have TriNet, who is is the perfect example of what I think a lot of us are trying to build, which is a $1 billion company. And these guys we'll have their founder, Burton, speaking tomorrow on this stage. And so we're very grateful for them. We hope you will talk to these people. You will thank them. You will meet them and use their products and try their products. So we're grateful to have everyone. We have a tradition. It's Startup Grind, and we do this at every event. And that is that our speakers give their time and their energy to come see us and to be with us. We don't pay our speakers, and we like them to feel welcome, like we appreciate them being here. And so what we do is we get up out of our feet, we get excited. Everybody with laptops is rolling their eyes at me right now. But we're going to practice this once, maybe twice. We'll just practice it once. I want you to imagine every time you see somebody walks up on the stage, whoever your hero is, I want you to imagine that is the person that's walking up on stage. Unless it's me. You don't have to imagine that. But I want you to imagine that Richard Branson is going to walk up on stage right here. He's one of my entrepreneurial heroes. And let's just practice this one time. Get up out of your seats. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Here we go. We got him. We got him. Okay. My good friend Jared, who's one of the best designers I've ever met and who's out here, put these together for us, and we really appreciate it. We have Sir Richard Branson. We have Elon, Marissa. If you always want to meet Marissa Mayer, she's here. And we have Bill Gates and Mr. Zuckerberg. So stop by, get a picture. There's some quirky, weird things that we do. We know they're weird, so you can tell us they're weird. That's fine, but we already know. But we hope that it makes you feel a little loose and have fun. And so we're going to get started here in just a minute. But welcome to Start Grind 2014.
All right. Good morning. We traveled for 39 hours to get here. So my name is Per, or purr, like the cat. And on stage with me, I have my friend Jonas. But although he's practiced for weeks and weeks and weeks, his English is not the best. So I'm just going to try to introduce myself shortly, and then I'm going to translate whatever Jonas tells us about himself. Ready? Right? So we are from Stockholm, Sweden. We started a Startup Grind chapter there in March last year. Any of you been to Stockholm? Did you like it? The Venice of Scandinavia. It's beautiful. If you haven't been there, go there. So, Jonas, who are you?
Hej, mitt namn är Jonas Almeling och jag kommer från Stockholm.
Hi, my name is Jonas Almling. I am from Stockholm.
Ni är så otroligt vackra. Jag är så otroligt glad att vara här. Det ser faktiskt ut som att ni skulle kunna komma från Sverige. Så vackra är ni.
All right. You guys are extremely beautiful. It's almost as if you were Swedish, all of you. And Jonas is extremely happy to be here because of that.
Så jag skulle vilja att ni ger er själva en otroligt varm applåd.
He wants you to give yourselves a big round of applause. All right. The subject of this first session is entrepreneurs that change the world. I remember my first Startup Grind Fireside chat with an entrepreneur from Sweden, a serial entrepreneur. He hadn't been in media for like 10 years, but he wanted to join us for this intimate fireside chat, telling us about his challenges. And towards the end of the interview, one of the things that I asked him is, how would you define an entrepreneur? And he's like, well, an entrepreneur is a person who changes the world for the better, right? So that's the subject of this first morning session. And I'm going to leave the word to Jonas, but now I think you just got to give it, you got to try it, because I can't translate. It's going to take just too long. We're already late, okay? So just give it a try. Your English, it's good. Come on.
Well, everyone, I'm like I said, I'm glad to be here. And honestly, there's no real issue with my English. So, another entrepreneur that really has changed the world is going to be the interviewee today, or the interviewer. He worked at Electronic Arts. He worked there for 4 years as product manager. He built products like Godfather, Burnout, and Mirror's Edge. He started in 2009 the Vaporware Labs, and he's failed at a number of tries, but he's now built something fantastic like the Startup Grind, the Common Red, and Steve Young Football, an iOS game. He's also an author at TechCrunch and at Business Insider, and he lives right here in Palo Alto. I think you all know who he is. He's Mr. Derek Andersen.
All right. Wait a minute. Wait, I haven't introduced our guest yet, but wow. You are...
He'll be right out.
You're ready.
He'll be right
you
out.
are ready.
Yeah.
I can feel the energy is rising in here. All right. Well, so our speaker and our first guest today, on AngelList, he's described as the venture capitalist who invests in who we are and who we are becoming. He's described as he's described by one of the founders of the companies that he has invested in as a smart, honest, and courageous guy who invests behind his instincts. He was part of the development team. He was actually leading the development team of Nintendo 64 at a company called Silicon Graphics. And he was also part of the very early development at a company doing virtual reality. He studied at MIT, and today he's involved in tons of different boards of entrepreneurship at Stanford. After 20 years of experience, he today works at Charles River Ventures. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a huge Startup Grind welcome to Mr. George Zachary!
Yeah!
Thank you. Thanks. Wow. Thank you.
That's the way to wake
Wow.
up.
That definitely beat the traffic.
Well, welcome.
Thank you very much.
This is
Great to be here.
You spoke last year. This is your third time speaking with us, so we greatly appreciate it
My pleasure.
and welcome you today. I wonder if we could. There's so much to talk about. I wonder if we could start by just talking about values, because you played a real critical role with Startup Grind. You all see our values all over. This really came from a conversation I had with George, where he said you have to get your values front and center in what you're doing, and it's made a huge impact on us. I wonder if you could talk about what are the importance of having values at the very early stage, 2 people, 3 people. Why do you need to have these, and how do you come up with them?
Well, the values of the founder basically set the trajectory of the company. They're very difficult to change after they start materializing in the company. So, like, for example, I'm not an investor in SpaceX, but I'm good friends with Elon Musk. And, Elon from the beginning, it was 12 years ago that we got together this spring where he was telling me he was going to send mice to Mars. And I was like, why are you going to send mice to Mars? He goes, because I'm going to colonize outer space, and I'm going to save humanity. So from Elon's core value, his thing was, I have to do something to make the world better. That carried through. So when I've been at SpaceX, you see it in all the employees. They're like charged up about what they're doing. I mean, it was very bizarre to hear them all, like 4,000 people cheering for Elon when he would walk into work. And I've been investors in other companies.
Was that planned, or was it spontaneous, or
It was
expected?
it was after a launch, so it was kind of a planned meeting, but a spontaneous reaction.
Yeah.
So, and I've been investor in other companies where the founder's #1 goal, whether they told people or not, was to make money. So, and as you saw the company roll out, they would try to take money off the table. The people they tried to hire, the whole organization was built around getting the early people money. And after they did, the company basically folded. It's hard to escape the early values of the founders.
What about, when you hear hundreds, thousands, you have heard tens of thousands of pitches. Can you see that when an entrepreneur pitches, and when they're talking about their vision, when they're talking about where their product's headed, what their values are? Can you spot it, very quickly? Do you have to, get to due diligence to figure these things out? At what point can you see where they sit on that spectrum?
Well, the question is what values are good and what values are bad. So that implies a judgment. The values that I'm particularly interested in as a business person is basically looking at, can this person develop and drive the company forward? Is their ambition to do this authentic to them? Is their problem they're solving authentic to them? So that's, I kind of pick that up. And one of the things that happens for me when I listen to people do this is, like, usually I hear slides, mouth, and person. And when someone's speaking authentically about what they're doing, they all kind of come aligned. So I sense no difference between the words someone's saying, the slides that are on the board, and them. So all those boundaries tend to basically disappear. And then I just have a gut reaction that says, this person is authentically focused on this, and it's energizing because when you connect to a person on really what they want, it adds to your life. So that's one of the reasons why I like my job.
How concrete should these be? Should they be, if we sit down and we start a company and we're in the garage, should they be the same thing, 3, 4 years later, 5 years later, or do they evolve over time?
I do think they get refined over time, but the starting block really doesn't change that much. You can sculpt them like a sculpture over time. You can write down what these values are and make it explicit for the whole company. That can help.
Do you remember some of the values of, like, when you first met with the Twitter team, or when you met with the precursor to the Yammer team? Do you remember some of the values that these guys had? Could you share those?
Well, the Twitter team.
Or Odeo. No, you can't.
Yeah, when it was Odeo. When it was Odeo. Just to answer another question, a lot of the stuff in hatching Twitter is very accurate from my perspective.
Who's read that book?
I would say
Wow.
it's written. It's actually pretty good. It's about 90% accurate about the events, but the author seemed to ascribe a lot more dramatic and malicious motivations to some of the people in the book, maybe because he wants to make it into a movie. But when I met the...
It is going to be a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who plays you in that? Do we know who plays George Zachary in that
Hopefully
movie?
hopefully no one. Everyone was really nice, really easy to get along with, but really bad at communicating.
Yeah.
So one of the core things I saw is that people had an issue with confrontation. And usually the issues that someone has in their life are sometimes good. It's a good fertile ground to actually develop a product. So it's no mistake that three guys who had problems communicating with each other, with themselves, with their family, would launch a product where they could indirectly communicate with people by typing 140-character text messages. That's not a coincidence. It really isn't. And I know it sounds funny, but it's actually true. It was easier for them to send texts via the early version of Twitter than to actually talk to each other about firing each other. Instead, they talked to me about that.
What was special about Evan Williams? I mean, when he came in, when you first met with him, or was he the first person you met? Did you meet with Noah Glass first? Who did you meet with when it came to Odeo?
I met Evan first.
Okay.
Evan is a smart person who's very focused on what is simple and obvious. He doesn't like long, complex discussions. He just wants things that are easy and fun and help people actually write and communicate. I mean, his Blogger, which was his first company, was actually very similar to Twitter in the way it started, which is it was another company that was focused on building online documentation tools. And it wasn't written well enough to be on an online documentation tool, and then Evan turned it into a blogging tool. So Evan, he was just an easy to get along. He was easy to negotiate with. He was easy to talk to. Compared to some of the other founders that I meet with and that I've invested in, he didn't have the megalomaniacal, I'm going to take over the world kind of aura about him.
Ego?
It's more than ego. It's just, it's a psychological need.
Yeah,
to
talk about
do
that. Talk about that. We have this video, you haven't seen it, but where we have this quote that you said before, that you back founders that have a psychological need to win, an all-consuming need to win. What is that? Am I born with that? Do I develop? Is that a skill I develop through?
I don't know if it's a skill that you develop, but what I've discovered is that, and I think someone has a quote about this, but those people who are most hurt by the world are usually the ones most likely to want to change it. If you're not really hurt or vexed by the world, you probably don't really feel like there's something to change. So initially, there's some kind of angst or fire that gets created, and the person spends energy to try to get past that. Without going into people's personal lives or the founders I've backed specifically, I've noted that this is very true. And the other thing I found is that most fantastic founders come from a somewhat chaotic family life when they're young. They tend to have a structure where there's one parent who's very involved and one person who's either absent or abusive or not there. And I would say it's 80% of the founders I've backed in my career,
wow,
when I've gotten to know them, have sooner or later admitted this.
So, I mean, I had great parents, and does that rule me out? I mean, is it like, hey, you should go work for one of the guys who's, or women who's, had it rough? I mean, does that, like, you say 20%, but like, can I have it? Can I?
Okay, so
give
this
it to me.
Is a really, I give it to you. The 20% of the people who kind of don't exhibit this, what I find is that they will drive and push things pretty far, but they won't push it as far as the people who are driven by this really deep pain. I'll put it that way. The people who have a deep pain just to say, I'm going to get there. They are compelled to get there. And psychologically, you might bracket them in some kind of clinical diagnosis, but that's one of the things I find.
When I spoke to Mike Maples, who was an early investor in both these companies as well, he said that he invested in Odeo. It was an area he was very excited about. When the Twitter founders, those who don't know the story, they shut Odeo down. Evan paid all his investors back, and then some of them came back into the next deal.
Yeah.
And as Mike described it, that when they pitched him Twitter, he basically had said, you know what, I don't care what these guys do. They gave me my money back. I never expected to get it back. Whatever they do, I'll just back. And it was like they pitched and he was like, this is crazy. But I've kind of like, I'm an investor, I guess. So was that the same with you? Did you, when you heard about Twitter, did you get it? Was it a commitment to the entrepreneur of like, hey, these are good guys. These are guys I back? Or where were you on that?
Yeah, the exact moment I heard about Twitter was I was in a room with Evan. We were having a board meeting, which was Evan and I.
For Odeo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was Evan and I and Ariel Poehler, who's a well-known angel investor.
He's coming here today,
Oh,
too.
good.
Yeah.
He's great. And Evan brought in Jack into the room, and Jack talked about TWTTR. And Noah. Noah Glass was there. Noah's now gotten some exposure for his contributions to Twitter, even though he got no equity, which is really sad, I think. And Jack came in and didn't say much. This is not uncommon in Twitter things, or in Odeo things. And he was describing it to Evan. He's like, well, you can, you can send multiple SMSs and lots of people can hear you and you don't have to keep sending the SMSs. And I was thinking, okay. So then Evan goes, so this is like RSS for SMS, because Evan thinks blogging. And at that point I realized, that's a pretty good idea. But what do you, like, that's interesting, because now, people are pitching me SMS group messaging. I said, but are people really going to want to expose their SMS messages publicly? So I had 3 reactions. One was, wow, that's a pretty good idea. 2 was, what? Like, why are people going to do this? And 3 was, how do I resolve the fact that I just had 2 very different reactions? One, which is like, something inside me says this is great, and another part of me rationally it says like, why are people going to use this? I can't rationally figure it out.
There was a clip of you with Bloomberg where you were on the floor at the IPO in New York City, and I wonder if you could just tell us, like, when you see a company get to that, go the distance, and you've seen it many times.
Yeah.
Generally, is it worth it? Do you find that at the end of it, are the entrepreneurs more happy? Are they? Is the success of getting an idea there what's worth it? Is it the, hey, they're not in it for money, you said earlier. So, what is it? Is it worth it? Is it worth everything that they have to go through to get there?
As one of my mentors frequently tells me, he says, there's happiness and there's meaning. I think the founders derive a tremendous amount of meaningfulness from that, from start to end. Whether they're happy or not, they're usually, when the IPO is happening, they're looking pretty happy. They're looking very happy, actually. But that tends not to last. Because when you're born as a human, you don't tend to have, it's not programmed into us to think, oh, having $1 billion makes you happy. So people kind of revert back to their happiness profile that they had before. The people that were grumpy before go back to being grumpy. The people that were happy before go back to being happy. I'd say marginally people are happier because they can buy material things. But if they were an anxious person before, they're still going to be an anxious person afterwards. They just have a new budget to spend the anxiety on.
Talk to us about Pebble. You're on the board.
Yeah.
You're an investor 2 times over. You've invested in the last 2 rounds.
Just one.
One round. Excuse me. And tell us about how you got involved with them. Why the market is exciting to you. Where we'll take. Tell us about it.
Okay. So first, I'll start with a bit of a funny story.
And people may not know what Pebble is. Maybe you can show them if you don't.
Well, I've got a Pebble watch on my hand here, which is I just got like 4 emails on it. So we were sitting.
Read them?
No, I don't want to read them.
Okay.
We were sitting in a partners meeting, and I was actually waiting for some news about someone in my family. So I was just really nervous, and I was expecting a text message. So I kept looking at my phone. I was thinking, this is really not good. And I was thinking that would always be cool for someone had a watch, or you can just see an important text message, so you could be instantly alerted. So about a year later, Eric Mijakovsky started his Kickstarter campaign for Pebble. and it became the most successful Pebble campaign. And I was watching. It was $10 to $11 million of orders. It wasn't a fluke that he had that many orders.
All on Kickstarter.
All on Kickstarter.
Wow.
So a couple people introduced us, and I just hit it off with Eric. And my first reaction was that not just that I love the idea, but I said, wow, this could basically a next big platform, this area around the wrist, not just for health, but actually for messaging. So I met Eric, and I knew after 30 minutes that I wanted to invest. I just felt it, and you know, one of the things I ask myself is, would I want to be a co-founder with this person to do that? So my track record in investing, I have a very high hit ratio in terms of things that have worked out. And a lot of people ask me, like, what is your secret system for doing this? And the only thing I can say is, I just try to listen to my own feeling of excitement. Would I want to join that person to pursue this project? That's kind of what I do. So Pebble last year had their first year of business. They announced at CES they shipped over 300,000 units, and at $150 per unit, you can do the math. It was, you know, it's a pretty big first year for a startup. It's almost $45 million of revenue in year one, and a highly profitable company. It's the most profitable company already that I've ever backed. So something is going on here that's good.
The fastest growing and the most profitable.
Yeah, and this year already in January, post Christmas holiday period, we're already running at 2x what we did last year. So that's really good.
Have you ever backed anything that's grown fast, or?
Yes, I mean, I backed a couple companies that are growing really fast, but none that have grown this quickly. When I invested, I had Eric pitch our partnership, and 3 or 4 people loved it, 3 or 4 people hated it.
Wow.
Which is always a really good sign that it's a really good idea for us to invest in. What we found, actually, it's
Is it because of those guys, the ones that hate it? You say, oh, if they hate it, then
yeah,
it's good,
well,
or?
if all of us vote super positively in the partnership, that means it's too obvious an idea. Like, why are we all believing, why is this all obvious to us as venture capitalists, including people who don't follow the segment? So we actually like there being controversy in the partnership. We like this bipolar split of votes. We actually vote 1 to 4.
Yeah.
So we like to see people, we like to see the distribution as wide, where other people saying, this is going to be the best ever, and other people say, this is never going to work.
Yeah.
So
that
was Pebble, in fact.
You said at the beginning that you got 2 or 3 introductions to Eric. Were those you getting introductions to him, or him getting introductions to you? Did he reach out to you, or was it the other way?
There was one person who was a director of business development at another consumer hardware startup who knew Eric and knew me. And he said, hey, are you interested in what Pebble's doing? I'm like, yeah, I'm really interested. And he told Eric, hey, you should meet this guy. He's like one of the few venture people that has any experience doing hardware as an operator.
Yeah.
So I met him, and we kind of hit it off in the first meeting.
What do you know, Pebble's going up against some massive players.
Yeah.
You know, Apple's probably coming out with something, Samsung, all these other people. How do they look at that? And as a startup, I mean, you know, that would seem like that could really petrify you, or maybe it inspires you. But how do entrepreneurs, or how does Eric or you guys, how do you look at these giants who like your space?
You know, as most things, it kind of scares the hell out of me, but it also inspires me. You know, I've backed enough startups to compete with very large companies that I'm not really worried about really large companies any longer. When I invested in Yammer, I told David Sachs, who's the founder, I said, David, this company is going to at least $1 billion. And he's like, what? Don't put this much pressure on me. I'm like, that's just my reaction. He goes, we have to deal with Microsoft, and Microsoft has email. And Microsoft just did not figure out what it was for quite a while. And then when they figured out, oh my God, these guys could eat Microsoft Outlook revenue, then they launched an effort to buy the company because they saw that they were susceptible to it. So they kind of took out Yammer for that reason. So with Twitter,
And they did buy him for more than $1 billion.
They did, yeah. With Twitter, when I first invested, it was the same round that Mike invested in. A very senior Facebook exec who is now a venture capitalist who is at a firm that actually put money into Twitter told me, he goes, why'd you do that? And I said, it's a simple product that people can use, and my gut feel says to do it. He goes, you realize you're going to lose all your money doing this? I said, why? He goes, it is so easy for Facebook to roll out status updates. And I told him, Facebook is a really big company. Like, they could, but like, who's going to work on it? He goes, well, Zuck knows, he's watching Twitter. Well, they never stopped Twitter. And Twitter didn't have like the world's most robust engineering team, I'll put it that way, or business team, and they were unable to stop Twitter. And that's because Facebook had a different focus. We saw the same thing with Instagram and Snapchat. It's hard for big companies to compete because you have to pick your focus as a startup, and you can execute really well as a startup now. It all matters. It all comes down to, can you inexpensively acquire customers? That's what you should be looking for as a startup founder.
I'd like to just talk in our last few minutes. I'd like to talk about just kind of having a good foundation for your career and what you plan to do. I think startups have become very cool. I hope we're not helping that trend. I quit my job in 2009 at Electronic Arts, and it didn't seem cool to start a startup then. That wasn't that long ago, but it was because of something inside of me to drive, not because of some movie or something I saw. And I wonder, you were an operator. You worked with SGI. You had all this experience before you became a venture capitalist. You weren't, I'm going to be a venture capitalist from day one. And actually, I think we have maybe just a tiny clip of your time at SGI. Maybe we could. Can we show that? We show George in action there.
I don't even
People
know
can remember.
Oh my God!
Let you in on just a few more of these specific technological details.
This is for the
behind
Nintendo 64.
George, what do we got?
First of all, let me tell you what we're going to be taking a look at. We're not going to be taking a look at highly produced computer animations. What we are going to be looking at are the real-time game environments that Nintendo Ultra 64 will be able to
Look
produce.
at the graphics.
That was 22 years
I'm
ago.
using this personal computer game to demonstrate the
That was
first
Doom.
method, called point sampling. With point sampling, things might look okay from a distance, but as you move closer, what you see is a bunch of colored blocks. This is another real-time Nintendo Ultra 64 environment featuring a shark we call Baz. Notice there are no blocks, no artifacts, no matter how close we get. Everything retains its natural texture. That's because in this world, everything is created using a totally different graphics technique called trilinear mid-map interpolation. For Nintendo Ultra 64,
Okay.
Yeah. 22 years
Trilinear
ago.
mid-map interpolation.
Interpolation.
I can't even say it right. I got it sitting here. Tell us about that foundation that you had and how that's impacted, what you've done. As we now see you publicly now, but you weren't like that before.
No, like foundation, like my roots.
Yeah, like working at SGI, making those contacts. Kind of seeing how a company like this can be run. Being an operator.
Well, I got involved in technology when it was called computing in 1977. So my friends and I were all early hackers. I'll leave it at that. And I had a little software development company in New York City when I was a teenager. I went to MIT, studied computer science. I worked for Apple as an intern, and then they offered me a job to be the product manager of next gen Mac 2, what was to become the Mac 2, but I wanted to get a college degree because I'm the first person in my family tree to get a college degree. It was actually important for me. Thank you. Thanks. So I had to make lots of ancestors proud, as it's something that's important to me. So I moved out here and I joined my friend's startup called Cat Software. I was the product manager. We wrote software for investment banks to mark-to-market and trade derivative instruments. And I actually had studied derivative instruments because I took a bunch of classes in finance at MIT. So I had to do everything from run sales to write network drivers. So that was pretty busy. We ended up getting acquired by SunGard, 1980, 90. And then I went to VPL. We coined the term virtual reality. I was one of 5 people there. I was the founding team member. And we did all this awesome stuff. We took money from the wrong people who were state appointed from the government of France, which was a bad mistake. I didn't know that at the time. But we all got buried behind what's called a liquidation preference, and we were all totally broke afterwards. I went on unemployment, and then I got offered a job at Silicon Graphics about 3 months later. and I just needed to psychologically and economically recover because I had lost all my money by that point. So then after that, so I worked on the SGI Nintendo 64 from start to finish, and we shipped end of '95, and I got recruited to be in venture capital then. And you know, I never wanted this job or thought it was like a fun job, but it's great because I don't have to manage anyone, which I actually really love. And I'm better at not managing people. I'm better with ideas than managing big chains of people. And it's the thing that I like the most is meeting people who want to change their station in life and make the world better, and listening to them, and the ones I get excited about getting involved with and funding them with money, and in the long term, importantly, funding them with my support. You know, I'm pretty well known in the venture business now for having term sheets like, I don't care, I don't need to control the board, I don't need board control, I don't need to have control over whether there's an M&A event. I don't need any of those provisions. The reason why is I back a founder to pursue a vision in a market by building a specific product in that specific order. So if I don't believe in the person as the founder, I shouldn't be investing. So that's kind of how I got here.
Let's give George a big, huge round of applause. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was easy. Well, that's how it should be.
All right. The Swedish guys are back.
How are you doing?
Oh, that was bad. Come on.
Come on, how are
We're
you
Vikings.
doing?
We are Vikings. We usually scream and shout when we have these helmets with horns on. And we're like, whoa. You want to try that? Can you do a roar? Like a Viking roar?
You can do it.
You're quiet. Okay, we're going to try that on 3. A Viking roar on 3. Ready? 1, 2,
3.
No, that was really bad.
Well, I guess the beautiful Swedes in the audience, they left.
Yeah,
but
they left.
Anyway,
They left. All right.
please have a seat.
It's time to get started. So, the subject for this session is building something on somebody else's platform. And I'm going to let Jonas start by introducing our interviewer.
And this interviewer, I met him yesterday. He's a really, really great guy. He is a former journalist from, and he was working out of Hong Kong for many years. He's now responsible for social media marketing for Bizspark at Microsoft, and where they are assisting development teams and startups and bringing their product to the market. He used to cover local news in Hong Kong for many years, and he headed up research teams in 18 countries in Asia, where they in the early 2000s were analyzing and tracking media and internet business there. He moved to San Francisco and then to Seattle. He ran his own business in New York for 5 years. And if you want to reach him, you can reach him at Bizspark. His name is Douglas Crest.
And our beloved guest is a lady from the island New Zealand. She had her first experience in the US when she went to college. She went back to New Zealand and started her first company. Then she came back to the US to do her MBA, and she started a second company. And her third company is Wildfire. Wildfire is a company that built on Facebook's platform, a platform for social media, or for social media marketing. And Wildfire has grown into a company with over 400 employees. They now have 8 offices around the world and tens and thousands of customers. What you might not know about this lady from New Zealand is that she is an adventurous traveler. Among other things, she's been living with an Amazonian tribe, a remote Amazonian tribe, for 6 weeks. She loves surfing and she loves snowboarding. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Victoria Ransom from Wildfire!
Hey! 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 Woo!
Thank you so much. You always count on the Swedish people to make you feel warm and at home. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you. This is Victoria Ransom. Nice to see you.
Hi, everyone.
I just want to start by saying I'm an extreme introvert, so I'll be tweeting my questions to her, and she'll be reading them and then telling you what I asked her. If everybody's cool with that, just follow the hashtag Doug is an introvert.
Which is problematic because I don't have my phone. So
Yeah.
someone in the audience will have to shout the question
She
to
has
me.
Google contact lenses on. That's what she's been doing at Wildfire. So you started your, here's what we'll do. I'll ask her some questions. We'll have a conversation. And when there's time left, probably 5 or 8 minutes, I'll turn it over to you guys. Ask her any questions. You started your entrepreneurial journey figuratively and literally very, very young. I mean, what I mean by that is you were a traveler, but you were also trying to launch companies, 3 of them so far. What is it like being young, being on your own, doing that, and then suddenly getting the knock on the door that Google wants to buy your company? How does that change you?
Well, I guess it's a process. So you don't go from, one day you've just started a business, the next day Google's knocking on the door, although it sort of felt like that. It went so quickly. So it's a process. Speaking particularly about Wildfire, I guess we started the business, we had an idea, we were actually trying to solve our own problem. We thought, let's solve this problem and see what happens. Before we knew it, we had customers, bigger customers than we imagined we had, and then we thought, maybe we could grow this, and so we started hiring people, then we raised money. So along the way, your vision of what you can achieve and your expectations are gradually rising.
Did you have a plan? Did you know that we're going to have this many employees so far,
No,
and then you were just making it up as
I
you
would
went
be
along?
lying if I said that. I mean, we had a vision of what we wanted to achieve, but it wasn't that we mapped out and said, in 2.5 years' time, we'll have 400 employees and 25,000 customers.
Yeah.
I think you set a goal here, and then you get there, or you get close to it, you're like, I can set a bigger goal and a bigger goal.
Right.
But nevertheless, even though I'm saying gradually our vision got bigger and bigger and bigger, it's still pretty amazing that day when I distinctly remember walking out of the Google offices, sitting in the car with my co-founder, who's actually also my husband now, and we were kind of like, holy shit, what just happened? So yeah, it's a kind of an amazing moment.
And I understand also that when you had found out that Google wanted to acquire you and was interested in the product and what you were doing with it, that you actually couldn't tell your team that this is what happened.
No, it's really hard.
So what is that like if the core of the product is the product development, and what do you do when that happens?
Well, largely you keep business as usual, and in fact that's precisely what you're meant to do, because an acquisition can fall apart at any time, and even probably a day or two before it announces. So the acquirer should be very clear and is very clear, and you yourself should be very clear that this thing might not work out and you need to keep running your business. So that's what we did. We kept running our business. But it is tricky when some people in the company know what's going on and are very, very, very distracted because of it.
Yeah.
Other parts of the company don't, but they may sense that something's going on. And we were a very transparent organization. We gave a lot of information to the team. We're always very clear with the team. It was hard to be hiding such a big thing from the team.
Yeah, and I guess the focus of our conversation is product development and what it's like to build a product on top of another service. You were already building on Facebook. Going back to what you just said, you're on the cusp of maybe moving that into Google. How do you make sure that the product, I'm really curious of sort of the granular aspect of what are you not telling the team, what are you telling the team to make sure that product development has integrity? Because you're talking about distracted people, you're talking about maybe all these motivations rising up and intentions rising up. What did you do? Did you have meetings with your team to sort of subtly signal, like, this is what you need to be doing, or?
Actually, no. I mean, we really didn't change the product direction or the product vision at all before going into Google. And even right after going into Google, and for quite some period of time after being a part of Google, we didn't change anything dramatically. And that was what Google wanted us to do as well. I mean, very much the mandate from, the person I was reporting into, Neil Mohan and others, was, you've built a great business, you know what you're doing, you have lots of customers, keep doing it, and as you're doing that, start to understand what Google's challenges are, start to understand what Google's opportunities are, and adjust, but don't make any sudden changes. I think probably, within Google, they've probably seen enough acquisitions where companies try to make changes too quickly and it doesn't work out, that we're actually given a lot of autonomy to just keep doing what we're doing and figure out where we fit in. So certainly before the acquisition, we didn't try to change directions.
There was no pressure to change the product once you were actually in Google, because you moved from CEO to director of product. What was that transition like, and what was the pressure like on the product to perform?
So I would say on the product specifically, aside from some of the obvious things like you have to make sure that you're compliant with all of Google's security and privacy and all of those sorts of things. That's something you need to assess and address right away. Beyond that, there were certain milestones set for these are the sorts of, and there were certain milestones set as part of the deal. This is what we want you to achieve. But like I say, it's actually quite a lot of autonomy and flexibility to do that at the pace that we thought made sense. In terms of my role, it was really interesting from one day to the next, pretty much. Pre-acquisition, everyone in the company reported into me. I think I had 15 direct reports. Day of the acquisition, all of my direct reports, pretty much all of them started reporting into different departments within Google. So head of sales reported into someone in sales. CMO started reporting into Google marketing. So that was a kind of a weird moment, but in actual fact, it didn't change a whole lot right away.
How was it? What do you mean it was weird?
Well, just emotionally, suddenly we're this team and it reports into me and suddenly it doesn't. But in practice, that didn't change a whole lot. I think we still very much operated as a team as we had done, and even if I wasn't officially having these different departments report into me, in practice I was still overseeing everything.
Do you feel that the product still has something of you and your co-founders' genetics in it, or your the sort of mission and the zeal and the integrity that you would put into it as a startup?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's still Alan and myself running the product organization. We've injected a few Google people into our product team, which is great, and into our engineering team. That's super helpful and healthy, but it's largely the same team. As I said, I guess I can't understate how much flexibility and freedom we've been given to chart our own path.
In the previous interview, they were talking about how Microsoft had to buy Yammer because Yammer was going to eat its lunch in terms of revenue. Did you have to sell Wildfire? I mean, was that the intention? I mean, or did that just seem like the best thing to happen to the company?
We certainly didn't have to. It wasn't the intention, and in fact, we weren't at all. It came out of the blue a little bit. It was a bit of a surprise to us. We had to have some kind of exit. I mean, we'd taken funding, and once you take funding, there's going to be some kind of exit. It's either an acquisition or you're going to go public. We were actually talking with bankers about the second option.
Really?
We were, yeah, because we didn't see any acquisitions on the horizon and things were going really well. In our industry, a lot of consolidation happened all at once, so that really did give us sort of food for thought of, is this the kind of industry that we think is meant to be public and independent, or is there a dynamic happening? I think there is and there was of a consolidation of marketing technologies.
Yeah.
So that felt like, I think this consolidation is happening, and we're probably better to join that rather than be the consolidator. On top of that, a company like Google comes knocking. We knew they were going to make an acquisition.
Yeah.
If it wasn't us, they probably would have acquired someone else. So you think, we can turn them down. Will we get such a good
You
opportunity?
didn't want that horse to pass you by, basically. The writing was on the wall.
Not really, particularly when it's a great company like Google.
So what's that like? What's your read on what that's like? Your product was built on Facebook, right? And now it's built on Facebook, built within Google. How is that received within the company? Do people look at that with suspicion? Do the people look at that with, what's really going on with Google? I mean, does that create a lot of conversations? I mean, we're only about almost 2 years into this, right?
Yeah, so not so much anymore, but the truth is when we were first acquired, there was we definitely had to help people understand why we were acquired, why it made sense.
That sounds like a euphemism.
Well, you have to understand, when you're acquired, there's certain sponsors for an acquisition, and they know all the rationale, and they believe in it, and they understand it. But there's 30,000 employees at Google more. They don't all understand the rationale for an acquisition. So I think a lot of the job of an acquired founder is actually to evangelize internally for what is your company, why is it important to Google, why are you here, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
So you have to do that anyway, and then we probably had to do that even more because there was this element of, that's really interesting. We don't usually work that closely with Facebook.
Yeah.
You guys, your whole business or a large part of your business is operating on Facebook. How does that work? What's that like? And, but people got it. They understood that.
Can we talk about sponsorship for a minute?
Sure.
For other aspiring entrepreneurs out there, sponsorship's incredibly important, not just for the acquisition, but now that you're inside of the company, I guess you've been through 2 budgetary cycles, I guess fiscal cycles where people are going to fight for resources. How does that play out as the director of product and with your sponsors? I mean, how does that relationship work?
It's a great question. I think it's a real misconception. You hear so often, I did after we got acquired, it's like, oh, that's great. Now you'll have all the resources in the world. Yeah. You won't be resource constrained anymore. And what you realize is inside of large companies, there's way more good ideas than there are resources. So there's just as high a bar for proving that a given project deserves to have more engineers, deserves to have more product people, deserves to have more budget. So there is a fight for resources. In our case, I think Google recognizes that it's quite tough for a startup. You've got to protect a startup a little bit because if you look at it based on revenue, for example, probably there's another project that deserves to get more engineers than this startup here that doesn't have as much revenues as this billion-dollar business over here. So actually, during the first sort of headcount process and deciding how much headcount we'd get, we were put through sort of our own special process and pretty well protected. This year, we're rolled into the normal process. But fortunately, I have a sponsor. Our engineering team has a sponsor that understands why we're there, understands what the purpose is, and has been really helpful. Yeah. In the same token, I think, we're pretty well resourced. We were really well resourced when we came in, actually. Yeah. We were very lucky. We were able to keep our hiring goals when we came in. We already had a big team. The whole team got acquired, so we're sort of coming in pretty well, I think.
How does customer acquisition work now that you're within that? I mean, does it operate like a separate entity, this business, and then your sales teams and marketing teams are out there going and getting those leads, or
more or less?
Or they just gravitate to you because you're in such a big company?
So we've maintained our own sales team, so we didn't just roll sales into the Google sales organization, which again is one of those misconceptions. I think when you're first acquired, you think, oh, Google has 12,000 salespeople and they have offices everywhere in the world. We're going to be everywhere. And then you realize those salespeople have a gazillion things that they could sell. They don't necessarily want to learn how to sell a new product. And by the way, AdWords is really profitable, so they'll probably sell that, not this new product. So it's actually been really helpful that we've had our own sales team. And what sort of happened organically over time is that sales team has built really strong relationships with the Google sales organization. They're all part of Google now, but in order to find ways that they can be co-selling together, that's happening a ton.
Sure. But you said AdWords is probably the big revenue driver for them. What about in 10 years? Do you think your product will be the more important thing? The sort of conversational marketing, relationship marketing, social media marketing kind of process?
I don't know if ours will be. It would be nice to say we're going to eclipse AdWords, but I don't know if I'd say that. But I think things are changing.
But I mean, will the
Marketing
focus
is changing.
change? Will the focus change? Will
Well,
someone...
I think Google has a very, very big focus on brand marketers. They've done extraordinarily well with performance marketers. They're doing great things for brand marketers, but I think Google sees that as a big growth opportunity, and obviously social marketing is a really important thing for brand marketers. So yeah, it's becoming really important.
Okay, let me go back to a question that I forgot, and I just remembered, and I'm actually quickly forgetting now. Hold on. Is it hierarchical, this fight for resources? I mean, do you have to still do some of this protecting of the product development team and sort of soothing them and making sure that they're keeping focused on their project while you just go and go out for the hard fight, and then does that work like a ladder? Because I've been in institutions, very large tech companies, for example, where that works in a very hierarchical way. You know, you set this bar, and then you have to go for this bar, and then you have to go for this, kind of discussions.
So it certainly is my job. The rest of my team isn't having to worry about it. So I guess it's hierarchical in that respect. Google is about the least hierarchical company that I could imagine. It's been very surprising to me to see how non-hierarchical it is. But yeah, it's my job. But no, I would say my experience, we've just gone through this process, and I think it was with my peers, it was sitting down, it was looking at all the resources that people have requested. It's looking at all the projects that could be funded, and then it was really together saying, do you really need this resource? And asking people to prioritize 1, 2, 3. I absolutely need this. I would like to have this. Maybe I don't need this. And you see people giving out resources for their own project because they see someone else's as more important. It's a good process.
How does that change the timeline for development of a product now that you? Does it put a stall in there because there's so much preparation for that mid-year planning or that end-of-the-year planning? Or is this a really lean team that's constantly...
Yeah, in our case, certainly we said we're going to set our goals, we're going to assume we can achieve them, and we're not going to... Yeah, there is a period of time where you don't know how many resources you're going to get, but you just say... that didn't stop us from just plowing forward and saying this is what we're going to achieve, and I think we have the resources we need to achieve what we want to achieve. Again, another thing that surprised me about Google, it's a big company, but there's scrappiness going on inside of that company. People have to stretch themselves.
And how many people are on your team now?
So in the product organization, I think we're about 10, engineering about 70. The whole company, I think we're around 380 or something like that.
That's good. That's healthy.
Yeah.
Any advice for people who are not quite at the stage of growth, but that are iterating an idea, completely focused on product, maybe in the growth hacking space, where they're trying to get customers or they're trying to fit the customer to the product? What worked for you when you and Alan were trying to build this?
Well, one thing that worked for us is, I have to caveat this by saying is we were in a great industry that was growing. So the first thing you got to find is find an industry that's got a lot of potential. Really ask yourself, is there a lot of growth opportunity here, or have you put yourself in a niche business? Because a niche business, it's like surfing a wave. It doesn't matter how good you surf it. If it's a small wave, you're not going to get a really big ride. If it's a big wave, you got to hold on tight. You got to surf really well, but you'll get a damn good ride. So we hit a big wave. So, that was great. That's the first step you've got to get. For us, things that were really important is getting those first marquee clients. So we kind of did anything we could to get a couple of well-known brands to use our product. We got Pepsi to use it. Early on, we got Paramount to use it.
How did you get those brands to use it? Was it an email? Did you just email someone and say?
First of all, that work was largely done for free. So, and we're like, let us do a case study. We'll do whatever you want. Don't let that change your vision or your roadmap. That's dangerous. But as long as it aligns with what you're planning to build, bend over backwards for those first couple clients and get a case study. Initially, it was reaching out through your network. So it really was. It was like, I know this person who's in Zappos. Let's contact him. He'll talk to someone else. And before we knew it, we had a deal with Zappos.
Okay.
Scrappiness.
Scrappiness is key. And you sound like the example that Mark Suster and Ben Horowitz were talking about last night. They were talking about building something that came from your own personal endeavors or your personal struggle.
Yep.
You were an avid traveler. You wanted, didn't maybe I'm wrong, I'm forgetting this, but the iteration of what became Wildfire started with you trying to solve a personal problem.
Yes.
And that was exactly what? Sorry.
We owned an adventure travel company called Access Trips. We created a fan page for Access Trips, and then immediately sort of had this this problem of, now what are we going to do? How are we going to get fans? How are we going to engage them? Wanted to give away a free trip. Realized to do that we'd have to build some kind of Facebook application. Thought that was kind of silly to just build that for ourselves, and figured other companies would have that problem. Built it in a way that other companies could use it, and that was what kicked it off.
Took off like wildfire.
Eventually.
Sorry, I had to get the pun in there.
Eventually.
We're going to move to questions from the audience. So is anyone, I see a hand up there. Do we have a way of, you can tweet me as well if you want to. It's a joke.
There's the mic.
Sorry to confuse you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm from Pakistan Startup Grind chapter, and I also have a social media agency. So my question is in two parts. A, how do you keep up to date on the product development? I mean, do you have an insight on what's going to happen on Facebook newsfeed, or do you have an insight on Google+? And then at the same time, when you're part of Google, what happens internally when you get to know about Facebook is going to do this and we need to kind of build our product along that way? So does that create a certain, I mean, you know, the Google Plus team would want to know what's going on Facebook. So how do you deal with that?
So was the last part, so just the very last part of your question?
Okay, so the last part was that if you do get to know about the features which are getting on, and you're part of Google, and you know that what would happen on Facebook, the next week, how do you kind of internally take care of that? Mm-hmm. I mean, what would the Google Plus team come up and ask what's going on, and we need to know, and we need to also roll out that feature?
How do you handle this diplomatically, I guess, but also professionally, ethically, but also how does that go into your product?
First of all, first thing I'd say is that it's very public knowledge we were acquired by Google. Facebook knows that very well. So Facebook lets us know what Facebook wants us to know. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, we've been pretty clear that we are Wildfire inside of Google, and we collaborate a ton with Google+, but the knowledge that we have about the ecosystem is the knowledge that we're using to build our product, not that we're sharing information back and forth. So we're pretty clear and careful about that. But again, like I would say, it's at the end of the day, the information that we're getting is what a lot of partners of Facebook are getting, and that information is very often public knowledge. If not right away, it becomes public knowledge quite quickly.
I guess that if I can piggyback off of that, what has the relationship with Facebook been like, though? I mean, I'm sure when you're a scrappy startup, they're a lot more open with you about wanting to experiment with you. Are there now sort of kid gloves on and not willing to, I mean, is it just the same relationship at all? I'm just wondering what the personalities are like, or what the feeling is like.
So I think the relationship has changed from when we were a small startup, but I would actually say that was changing anyway as Facebook grew up. So you're right, when Facebook was younger and we were just starting out, there was no program for preferred developers. There was no process for getting information through. So it was really like you'd go and visit Facebook, and you'd tell them what you're doing, they'd tell you what they're doing, and you'd figure it out together. Yeah. Over time, they very much formalized that process for working with their partners in a good way, I think. So there's clear ways to communicate, and so I think that was happening anyway. Of course, a part of building on a platform, though, is that you try to build relationships inside of the company. So there's those relationships, which is a way to help you get additional information about what's going on inside of a company. And some of those have probably changed a little.
And I will get back to questions, but I just had another one. Are there other opportunities in this social media marketing space to build on platforms like Facebook? Do you think there's still ground out there to tackle? Or do you think that consolidation has really taken place and now we're just waiting for it to kind of scale out in the system?
I think there are other opportunities. There are plenty of independent companies that are doing really well. There's actually been a pretty clear bifurcation, I would say, around customer service for social and then paid advertising for social. Those are two, I'd say, big growth areas, and a lot of companies are popping up and sort of focusing on those areas and doing really well, and a lot of them are independent companies. Right. So there's still tons of growth out there, but I do think there's a general desire from brands to say, I don't want to work with 50 different technology providers to solve my marketing needs. So as companies can start to pull that together well, and I think we're in the early stages of that, then I do think there's a dynamic of trying to bring that together, and it's perhaps harder in the long run to be a niche player doing this one little thing.
Right.
But let's face it, the consolidators can't solve all needs, so there's still plenty of room for more specialized technologies. I
Sure,
think.
they're going to create their own inertia, really, and then that can be disrupted. Oh man, we're up for disruption all day.
All the time.
Yeah. Are there any other questions out there? There's one over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Arcuri. I'm a startup, and I was curious. Sorry, hi.
Hi.
I'm just curious because I'm a startup. I've been running the last 3 years in London, and then now expanding Middle East, South America, and I feel like I keep asking everyone I can, when you get that first offer where someone's like, I'm interested in buying you, and I can't actually disclose who came to me recently, but I was like, what? You know, how do you even begin to collect and align the dots? And then I'm thinking, is this something I regret in a few years? Is this too premature? Should I continue to build on what I've started? Am I even in the same reign to like even go into business with these guys? So I'm just curious what you thought as a startup.
Yeah.
And then if you were to do it again, would you do it the same way? And then for the next time that you start your startup and the next person that comes to you wanting to put in the first offer of acquisition or merger, would you do it the same way? Would you, what advice would you?
It's a great question. I think it's a really, really hard one to answer, because you can, for every story that you can tell of someone who decided not to sell and it worked out really well, you know, Facebook is a really famous example. Google is a really famous example. They could have sold so early, they didn't, and thank God they didn't. You can find so many counterexamples. I have friends in this situation that could have sold. They didn't. The dynamics of their market changed, and they're in a really tough spot, and I bet they wish they could have sold. So it's a hard one for me to answer for you. In our case, I don't regret it at all. I think we sold at a really good time. I know a lot of people that do sell and regret it, so that's always a possibility. I guess I would say, as much as possible, try to spend time with whoever this company is that's interested. And for us, a lot of the relationship, or a lot of what happened with Google was a relationship thing. It was meeting people and feeling like, wow, we're really aligned in our thinking here. I really like these people. They really like me. I think the culture can align. I think this is going to be really great for our employees. I'm going to feel good about this for our employees. Plus, really looking at, as I mentioned before, the industry dynamics. You know, are there some reasons why this might be a really good time now, and there might be some things in the horizon that would mean it's better to be part of a bigger company? We had some casual conversations earlier on. We could have sold the company earlier on, and I would have regretted it, I think. Although, hindsight's 20/20, right? Maybe I'm only saying that because I knew that we stuck it out longer and it worked out better. Hard one to answer, but I would say take that time to both really consider your industry dynamics, where your companies are at, and then to just feel really good about this relationship. Because I think when a lot of people regret it, it's when it was a really poor cultural fit and they're miserable inside of this acquirer, and they just say, I used to love what I'm doing and now I don't, and what did I do?
I think we have one more question we can ask, and then.
Can you please talk about how you figure out your customers, find out what they like, what they don't like, and drive your product to meet their needs?
Sure. I think we've formalized that over time. Today we have a few different ways for doing that. So one is we have such fantastic knowledge inside of our company, inside of our client services organization, inside of our sales organization. So we have what are called core teams, which meet on a weekly basis with our product organization, and they share ideas. They share feedback from customers. They comment on features that we're developing. They comment on the roadmap. So using our internal resources. And then there's our product and UX team going directly to customers. So we have a set of customers that are really great advisors to us that we meet with on a regular basis. And then beyond that, there are a bunch of other customers that we just reach out to and we have conversations with. So it's as simple as that, I guess. It's a combination of directly being with customers and then being well tuned into our internal sales and client services organization.
So I have one last thing to ask you before I wrap it up. You're a traveler. Do you have that wanderlust to go out and start another startup? Do you think you'll leave Google at some point and just create another challenge for yourself?
I think it's likely.
Awesome.
But not right away. I'm happy where I'm at right now, but I think it's likely.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. That's fine. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Another big round of applause, please. Beautiful. Oh my God, this day is really coming along, isn't it? Yes, it is. And here's Per as well.
Yes, here I am.
Guys, how you feeling? You excited? Yeah.
Oh, that was lame.
Come on. are you
Let's try it
excited?
again. Are you guys excited?
Yeah.
Woo! Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. That's more like it. That's more like it. So back in Sweden right now, there is snow. Tons of snow. And I think we brought a little rain. You're happy for that, right? Yeah. We thought it was fall when we got here. I mean, all the leaves were off your trees and stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, this is fall in Sweden. But apparently it's supposed to be green in the winter here, right? Yeah, we're confused. We're really confused. But we're happy that we were able to bring some rain.
Yeah, sort of glad I bought the winter coat. But the next topic is getting from angels to Series A and beyond, and how startups are actually getting funded. And this, to me, is a topic that concerns almost all entrepreneurs, and it's also a very global topic. It's something that really is a key interest and something that we talk a lot about concerning the grind. This is tough. It's hard. We're constantly struggling with these topics. And so therefore it's very exciting to listen to this next talk and see what we can learn from the stories.
Yeah. And the interviewer and the lady that will lead this interview is Joy Randels. And Joy is she's the Startup Grind chapter director in Tampa, Florida. And she's also the representative for Startup Weekend in Tampa. And what they're trying to do in Tampa is kind of bring the tech community together and create a city, a vibrant city of startups and entrepreneurship and people that want to change things for the better. And Joy, she is a really qualified interviewer. She's raised over $300 million in capital. She started 13 startups, of which 2 have been through an IPO, and 9 of them have been acquired. And today she is at New Market Partners, where they help emerging entrepreneurs and startups to scale locally and internationally.
So that's Joy Randels. And her interviewee today, she founded Forerunner Ventures, which is an early stage VC. She's extremely good at identifying visionary entrepreneurs and brand platforms to invest in. She has, through her company, partnered with some really promising companies in the evolution of commerce. Some of these companies you might know. They're Birchbox, Bonobos, Hotel Tonight, Nomi, and Warby Parker. I must say, I just met her briefly outside. She's an extremely vibrant woman. I so look forward to bringing her on stage. So please, give a warm Startup Grind welcome to Kirsten Green.
Come on. Woo! Yeah, here we go. Come on.
Woo! Yeah.
Hey, guys. Thank you. Awesome. That's right. All right. Welcome, guys. So you heard a great intro about Kirsten. So I'm just going to kind of jump right into it. So tell us about building Forerunner Ventures, right? It's not your typical venture capital firm. So what were some of the obstacles that you had to overcome in building the firm? I don't think her mic's on. Oh. He's coming.
So as Joy kind of hinted at, I think maybe a little bit of a circuitous route to being in the venture business.
I think he's coming around the back. There we go. Awesome.
All right, better? Okay. So I've been investing for my career. I spent the first 10 years in the public markets,
I had a chance to get involved in investing in the retail sector when it was pretty early in kind of what I think of as the last big cycle. It was the time when the real estate industry was populating our landscape with malls, and all kinds of new specialty retail concepts were coming to birth. And it was a really fun time. And sort of the secret to, I think, getting some traction in the space as an investor was identifying what was new and what was up and coming and what had growth opportunities. And then over the course of a 10-year period, like any cycle happens, it played out, and I got to sort of the early 2000 area, and suddenly, it felt like the investment thesis had totally changed. It had moved from growth and opportunity to one of we just put up too many stores across the country. Amazon and eBay became big companies while we were doing that, and now everybody better start closing stores and rationalizing their cost structure. And so as an investor, it was just a much different thesis to be kind of looking at the investment landscape and opportunities through. And it got me starting to think about, well, if one cycle has ended, there must be another cycle on the horizon. And it was a lot more fun being involved in things that were early stage that had a lot of potential in assessing growth. And so I thought, well, I'd like to be part of the next cycle of innovation that happens in the retail and the consumer area. And at that time, it wasn't obvious to me where to go do that. So I left my job, and I thought I would go do a little bit of networking and try to figure out the landscape and find a good firm to work at, hopefully, and start investing in private companies in advance of the next cycle. And I guess a couple of years into it, I sort of realized that I had kind of forged my own territory. Not necessarily that was the plan originally,
Right.
But along the way, I met a lot of smart people. I got a lot of input on kind of backgrounds of different investors, different approaches to investing, what it meant to partner with a private company, and I kind of formulated some of my own ideas about that. And at some point, it became something that almost I felt ownership over, and I wanted to do myself. And so in 2006, I started making single investments off of one-off partnerships. We invested anywhere from like $1.5 million to $10 million in individual investment opportunities. Took board seats. That was kind of learning on the job, training. And then by 2009, we were able to put together a first discretionary fund. So it was a bit of a long journey,
Right.
but I think every step along the way was necessary to build some credibility and to have confidence that identified an opportunity that I could step into.
Well, you've accomplished a lot, right? You started from a fund perspective with a $40 million fund, and you have over $100 million under management now. Is that right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I saw, I was reading one of the articles you wrote in Entrepreneur Magazine, and you talked about branding and the importance of branding to companies in this space, and a lot of the investing you do is in the e-commerce space. How do entrepreneurs they have no money, right? I've got no money, I've got anything. How do they actually make a brand, and how important is that to their success?
So kind of my preference or my strong disposition to back brands, or at least people that intended to build a brand, comes from the basic idea that we live in a world right now where product is pretty ubiquitous. As a consumer, it's good to be a consumer these days. You want something, you can pretty much find it. And similarly, there used to be a game where you could compete on access. Somebody had an exclusive to something, and that gave you an advantage as a company or as a retailer. Now, particularly with the internet and everything digital related, it's really open access. You can pretty much get what you want, when you want it, how you want it. And price has never been a particularly good business model to compete on. It tends to be a race for the bottom, and it can leave you in tricky spots. And so, stepping back from those three things and thinking about where are the opportunities to differentiate. And I really believe that in the consumer industry in particular, it's all about delivering an experience. At the end of the day, this is mostly applicable for the discretionary space. Consumers are emotional people. They're looking to be drawn and attract to something. It's not just about the end item or service that they're getting, but it's about the entire journey, how they're feeling along the way. And I think I saw that early on in my investing career, that if you delivered an experience versus just a product, you had a lot more longevity to that relationship you had with the consumer, which is a really important thing in the consumer space. Like, it's one thing to get a consumer and sell them one thing, but you really, in order to build a business, you really need to be able to get that consumer and sell them 2, 3, 4 things. And so coming from a place of like where you were creating an experience, you were emotionally connecting with them, something about, you know, the entire service that you were delivering had an opportunity to create a connection is really valuable.
So a lot of emotional ROI, right?
A lot of emotional ROI.
So how does that translate into traction, right? And the metrics that you look for from an investment perspective. You've made a lot of investments in e-commerce companies. Are there common denominators there? Are there things that entrepreneurs should look to strive to achieve to make themselves investable?
I mean, obviously, at different stages of company building, there are different metrics or different points of traction that are available to you. So starting with kind of the earliest stage, where we tend to invest in, you know, seed stage companies, and sometimes that means there's some level of traction, and sometimes it means it's an idea. And I think that, you know, if I drew out a common denominator at those very earliest stages, it would be founders that are approaching their business from a standpoint of a real connection to the product or service that they're putting out there. So, you know, they have personally felt the need or identified the opportunity for this particular service or item and feel almost compelled, like the only thing they can do is bring this to life. I mean, the reality is when somebody comes in with a very early stage business, it's not a brand. I mean, something is arguably not a brand until you're doing hundreds of millions of dollars of business. But I think there is some certain architecture that you can start out with at the very beginning that lays a foundation that signifies that you have a potential to build a brand. And a lot of it just starts from a point of authenticity and a connection to the consumer and a reason for what you're doing and a true value proposition related to it.
Okay. So to that point, right, so a lot of the brands, we've invested in some brands that have turned out to be really great brands that are well known around the world. How important do you think mobile is, and should it be mobile first now when it comes to e-commerce?
It's a good question. You know, I mean, things are changing so fast, as all of you guys know, being involved in the startup, you know, world. I mean, it's like you changing at warp speed to stay on top of things. Sure. And I think a couple of years ago, even when I made some of the investments that were mentioned in the interview here or the preview here, you know, mobile wasn't something that was terribly important. Today, it's hugely important. It's the primary place where people are checking their devices. So I think that, you know, it's a requirement to stay on or ahead of the trend and really in tune with what the consumer is doing. And again, like I said earlier, I think that, you know, it is good to be a consumer these days because the consumer is in the driver's seat. They are pushing this revolution forward. And I think that the winning teams are really listening and taking cues from their consumer and are in their heads and are staying in front of that. And so in that framework, mobile is really important. You know, whether you need to be mobile first or where it fits into your strategy is really dependent on the particular service you're doing.
Okay.
But it needs to be considered.
But it's a critical element.
Yeah.
So in thinking about founders, right, it's very, you know, usually if you've got an idea and your family doesn't think you're completely insane, right, you can get some money to get started from a friends and family perspective. Yep. But entrepreneurs have a tendency to struggle after they get that little bit of initial traction before they get to a traditional Series A, right, to an investor round. Mm-hmm. How do they bridge that gap? What are some ways that you've seen companies be able to achieve that and get to that investor round?
I think, you know, just like every element of your business, the fundraising business is a part where you should be, you know, researching and thinking ahead and staying on top of the market and understanding kind of what, you know, where you're going, where you're getting into with that. And so if you've, you know, raised a little bit of money, you've communicated to investors what you're going to do with the money, that resonated, they gave you the money, then be thinking about, okay, this gets me how much time and where are the pools of people that I need to be talking to get the next round of money. Try to start those conversations early. Try to, you know, solicit feedback. I mean, in general, I think one of the things I love about this space so much is that it is a collaborative industry. It does work on a, you know, on a village and a community basis, and I think people are willing to share and give information. So I wouldn't be afraid to reach out to an investor, even though you know you're early, and say, I'm building this company, here's what I'm doing, here's what's special. If I do these things, I'm going to be looking for money. What kinds of things are you going to be looking for? And just collect feedback. You'll get a different answer from every person you talk to, but I think over time you do some of that research and it starts to become clearer to you what it is.
So that's great. So from Forerunner's perspective, right, are there specific metrics that you look for when you're making that decision? I mean, obviously founders are important in that emotional connection, but when you're looking at the other side, right, if we're looking at the metrics side, what do you look for to determine if a company is investable?
So if we have the luxury of making an investment after there's some traction already displayed in the market, things that we're looking for are, you know, how is the company finding customers? What is their method for going about and acquiring customers? I think that there's this big trap that a lot of people, can sell a good pitch and have a big story about a big market they're addressing and have, the MBA case laid out and go and raise tons and tons of money and just pay for marketing. I'm kind of, not a believer in that as a good long-term business. I think the good long-term business strategy tied to this whole idea of brand and emotional connection, understanding your consumer, is one where the consumer is excited enough about what you're doing that there's an element of virality for it. And I'm not saying you just, don't spend any money on marketing. Of course, you have to spend money on marketing. But I think, we're looking for something that's resonating with the consumer. We're looking for something where there is a consumer get consumer attitude, where you've brought in somebody, you've given them a product, they've interacted with a company, and they can't help but tell somebody else about it, and that's where you get your next sale. So kind of evaluating, like, early on, what is the lower the cost of customer acquisition, just to be really specific, the better, I think, and the bigger the opportunity for, there to be a profitable business. I think you also have to start with a margin structure that makes sense. Understand what business you're in, understand what kind of operating costs they're going to take to bring it to life, and make sure that you're operating at a level, at a product margin level where it makes sense. A lot of times people have a really great business idea and they're trying to, deliver value. That's something that we all key in on. Value sometimes gets misinterpreted for just price, and they kind of try to compete on price at the sacrifice of margin. And over time, that's a really hard place to be, too. So I think we're looking for something that has a healthy margin structure.
Okay.
Those usually go hand in hand.
True. So in a lot of your portfolio companies, right, they've made some tremendous strides from the time that you made your investment to where they are today. What do you think are the critical factors that help a company go from that 0 to 2 million in that 2 to 5 year window, right? Because you have to show a return to your limited partners as well. So are there common denominators that you see in the companies that have been successful at that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you guys know you're all in the startup world. It is not easy. And particularly now, we're kind of talking more specifically about companies that have, physical products that you're bringing to life, working capital cycles that you're managing. Then you've got to have sort of the digital place to sell it. You have to have acumen around that, how to acquire a customer, how to get a customer, how to drive a repeat rate on a customer. It's a tall order. But I think that if I look back on some of the companies that we've been fortunate to partner with that have been successful, it's pretty clear there's one common trait that I would attribute to all of them, and that is the ability to empower a team. It's the ability to have a vision that resonates with people, where they feel like they want to be part of it, and they come on board, and they then get supported by the ability to kind of run with their tasks and grow with it.
Okay. So if you were giving advice to an entrepreneur about how to build a successful business, right, and there were 3 things that you could tell them, reversing the table. So, with being the entrepreneur and knowing what you know, what 3 pieces of advice would you give them to build something that becomes an investable business, right, and that's going to succeed long term?
I mean, I don't want to be redundant from what I just said, but I think some of the things were some of the key things. It's like, really think about, like, your product market fit. Like, what product are you bringing to market? Where does it fit into the landscape? And does the consumer need it? Do they want it? Is it better? And will they pay for it? Hopefully you're not competing on just price. That's not the best long-term place to compete on. Again, I think you want to start with a sound business model. You want to make sure that you've got, appropriate room to run a profitable business. I think, another common trait, I guess I would say, of people that are, I think have been successful is that you almost have this feeling of, like, I have to do this. Like, this is what I was meant to do. I can't do anything else, because it's hard. It's really hard. And I think if you don't feel that way, you don't feel a personal connection to what you're doing, it's hard. It's easier to give up. And I think you can't give up. You got to have perseverance, because most things, I have some companies that I've been fortunate to be involved in that I think look from the outside like they just did this. Nothing does that. Everything has its ups and downs, for sure.
So you've also added, right? You started, and a lot of the companies you started investing in early were e-commerce, B2C companies. But in your portfolio of late, right, you've started to add some companies that are still in that space, and some that are social, have a social significance, but that support that infrastructure that's needed for those e-commerce companies. Was that an accident? Was it by design? How did that actually happen?
It's a good question. So it's driven really by two things. So first and foremost, I think in my journey to build this business or start Forerunner, I always had this attitude of like, well, what does it mean to be a good partner to entrepreneurs? What do I need to do to kind of create some value or be somebody that contributes around the table? Because honestly, like that's kind of where the fun of it is, And so early on, I was more focused on consumer-facing companies that had products involved because that was kind of where my background and my personal just connection leaned towards. And in an effort to understand those companies and try to do things to add value, I would ask, like, what are you guys struggling with? What's going on? And I would hear some common themes. Trying to figure out this social marketing. How do we measure that? What do we do with this? How do we plan our inventory this way? And so that sort of led me on a path to learning about some of those companies. And while I did that, I became intrigued by their business opportunities. And it was an interesting kind of approach because I already knew what the need was on the client side. And so we started investing in some B2B companies that support some of the e-commerce companies. And then I think, stepping back and thinking more strategically about growing my business, our business, it's good portfolio diversification to have a mix of companies.
Awesome.
And it's nice when you can foster some connection between the portfolio companies and advantages with each other.
To help them be successful.
Yeah.
So I think we got time maybe for one more question. So I'm going to ask something. Is there one thing, if someone's coming to pitch you, because everybody who's got a startup in the room wants to know about pitching a VC, right? Is there one thing that's the kiss of death when they come to pitch you that you would just go like, nope, that's it, I'm done?
You're not going to like this answer, Joy, but no. There's not one thing you can do to just blow yourself up, But I mean, I think that this is going to sound like a very trite answer, but it's just the truth. But I think, being focused and kind of clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it and how you're going to execute at least the next 12 months or 18 months, or whatever you're raising money for, is really important. Because I think that as an investor, it's a dangerous place when you start taking leaps of your own. You're like, I like this, and then if they only do this or that or whatever, you start and like putting your own thoughts and your own fantasies into it, kind of dangerous. You want to make sure that like you're on the same page with the founder, respect the founder's vision, and support the founder's vision to your best of ability. You can have, you can count, I think, hope to build a relationship where you can offer guidance, which may influence things down the road. But I think you really want to kind of start out from a place of where you're connecting on the same thing. And in order to do that, you have to be, as a founder pitching an investor, you have to be clear about what it is you want to do, how you want to do it, why you want to do it.
So clarity is really a big key. That you need to believe that they can accomplish what they're telling you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hey, I know we're running out of time, so I want to thank you very much for being here. And it's awesome to see somebody who's investing in the early stage companies.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten, Joy. It's been a pleasure. And, well, thank you very much. Whenever in Sweden, come by. Another big round of applause, please. Thank you very much, guys. We now have a 20-minute break. And just to let you know, if you want to go to Sweden, if you want to know more about Stockholm and Sweden, we're going to be right outside. We're filming some interviews with you as well. If you want to, we want to tell your stories in Sweden. So come by, look up my empire. Nice to see you. Thanks a lot.
two.
Hey, 1, 2. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.